What if I told you that many of the technologies we consider modern are actually just echoes of ingenious discoveries made 2,000 years ago? Ancient Rome, which we tend to associate with legions and gladiators, was also a civilization of engineers whose inventions were thousands of years ahead of their time. They built megacities, controlled water flows, and created comfort without a single electrical wire. This empire created infrastructure that continued to function centuries after its fall, and many of these technologies still baffle modern experts. Watch this video to the end to learn how the Romans managed to build a structure that repaired itself underwater and why their concrete recipe was lost for 1,500 years. I will reveal to you the most closely guarded secret of Roman engineers. When we look at the ruins of the Pantheon, or ancient aqueducts, we see not just stones, but the triumph of a revolutionary material. Roman concrete, or opus cementitium, it was not just a binding agent, but a true composite material that allowed the Romans to move from simple block architecture to the creation of monolithic, curved forms. It was concrete that enabled them to build giant domes, massive arches, and harbors capable of withstanding the onslaught of the sea. It was stronger, lighter, and much more versatile than any stone. The secret ingredient, especially for marine structures, was volcanic ash, known as pozzolan, which they extracted in the Pozzuoli area near Naples. Unlike modern Portland cement, which needs a dry environment to harden, Roman concrete with pozzolan set perfectly underwater. This property was an absolute breakthrough in engineering. The Romans could lower wooden forms directly onto the seabed, fill them with a mixture of lime, pozzolan, and stone debris, and be confident that the structure would become monolithic. Roman engineers used this material with remarkable efficiency, creating wooden formwork and filling it with layers of concrete and stones. This allowed them to erect walls of enormous thickness and height much faster and with less labor than when using hewn stone. Concrete structures, such as aqueducts, did not require each block to fit perfectly, which significantly accelerated construction. It was a real industrial revolution in construction, allowing the empire to expand so quickly and develop new territories. Recent studies have revealed an even more surprising feature of this material, especially in its marine form. When exposed to salt water, new minerals such as tobermorite form in the structure of Roman concrete over time. These minerals actually grow in microcracks, making the structure stronger over time. This is the exact opposite of modern concrete, which deteriorates and corrodes over time in aggressive marine environments. This self-repairing effect is the reason why Roman piers and harbors, such as those in Caesarea, have stood for 2,000 years, exposed to constant wave action. Modern engineers are only now beginning to understand and attempt to recreate these principles for the construction of more durable port facilities. The Romans, either intuitively or through hundreds of years of trial and error, created a material that lived and grew stronger in an environment that is destructive to us. To build massive structures such as the Dome of the Pantheon in Rome, engineers used different concrete compositions. Heavy and durable concrete with large basalt inclusions was used at the base of the dome. As it rose toward the top, the composition changed, with lighter materials such as pumice or porous lava being added. This reduced the overall weight of the structure and lowered the lateral pressure on the walls, which was a brilliant engineering solution. The architects of Rome did not simply use concrete as a substitute for stone. They created a new architectural philosophy. The ability to cast curved shapes allowed them to build huge vaulted ceilings in baths and basilicas. These gigantic, light-filled spaces were designed to demonstrate the power and grandeur of the empire. Without opus cementitium, Roman architecture would never have reached its full potential. When the Roman Empire fell, the complex logistical chains necessary for the extraction of pozzolan and the organization of large-scale construction projects were destroyed. The recipe for this amazing concrete was effectively lost. The Middle Ages saw a return to more primitive masonry techniques, and it was not until the Renaissance that architects began to rediscover the engineering secrets of their Roman predecessors. But they never created a complete analog of their concrete. Today, scientists are actively studying samples of Roman concrete, trying to unravel all its secrets in order to create more environmentally friendly and durable building materials. Modern cement production is one of the largest sources of carbon dioxide emissions. The Roman recipe, which required lower lime-burning temperatures, may point us toward greener construction. The history of Roman concrete is not just a story about an ancient invention, it is a lesson for modern technology. It reminds us that durability and harmony with the environment can be more important than short-term efficiency. The Romans built for centuries, and their concrete, which only becomes stronger in seawater, is silent proof of this. I'm very interested to hear your point of view. What do you think about why humanity lost this technology for 115 or 100 years? Write about it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Are you ready to learn the truth about how an entire metropolis with a population of millions quenched its thirst without a single pump? The answer lies in one of the most recognizable symbols of Roman engineering: aqueducts. These were not just water channels, but complex systems that delivered the purest spring water to cities tens of kilometers away. The Romans understood that water was more important than gold for maintaining hygiene and the functioning of a metropolis such as Rome. Building an aqueduct was an incredibly difficult task that required extremely precise calculations. It was all about gravity. Roman engineers, or architects, had to find a water source that was located higher than the endpoint in the city. Then they laid a canal with a very small but constant slope, averaging only a few centimeters per 100 meters of distance. This constant slope was the key to success. Too steep a slope would cause the water to flow too fast and destroy the walls of the canal. Too little slope, and the water would simply stagnate. Engineers used tools such as the horbat, a long wooden beam with a level, and the G-groma to mark right angles to ensure a perfect trajectory. Contrary to popular belief, most of the aqueducts ran underground, and this was a practical solution. Underground channels were protected from contamination, evaporation in hot climates, and enemy sabotage. Only when crossing valleys and ravines did the Romans erect their famous multi-tiered arches, which are true works of art. The arches that we so often see on postcards were not only beautiful, but also incredibly effective. They allowed the necessary slope to be maintained without having to make long detours around the valley. At the same time, the arch structure was very durable and saved on building materials compared to a solid wall. Structures such as the Pont du Gard in southern France still amaze with their elegance and scale. Inside Rome itself, water from the aqueducts flowed into huge distribution reservoirs, or castella aquae. From these reservoirs, water was distributed through a system of lead and ceramic pipes to public fountains, thermal baths, and the homes of wealthy citizens. The fountains were not just decoration, but the main source of drinking water for most of the population. The Romans also developed a complex system for maintaining these waterways. There was a special government service, cura aquarum, which monitored the condition of the canals. Regular cleaning was carried out. Special workers descended into the tunnels and removed lime deposits and debris. For this purpose, ventilation and inspection shafts were provided in the aqueducts. The total volume of water supplied to Rome during its heyday was enormous. According to some estimates, 11 aqueducts delivered up to 1 million cubic meters of water per day to the city. This is more than in many modern cities, if calculated per capita. This surplus of water allowed the Romans to maintain an unprecedented level of public hygiene and luxury in the form of thermal baths. The fall of the empire led to the decline of this complex system. Aqueducts were no longer maintained, canals became clogged, and arches collapsed. The cities of medieval Europe returned to using wells and river water, which had disastrous consequences for hygiene. The majestic ruins of the aqueducts were a reminder of former greatness and lost knowledge that seemed almost magical. The engineering principles laid down by the Romans in the construction of aqueducts are still relevant today. The idea of using gravity to transport water over long distances is the basis of many modern water supply systems. Roman aqueducts are a lasting monument to the engineering genius that was able to tame water and put it to work for humans. Which of the systems of ancient Rome do you find most impressive from a logistical point of view? But how did the Romans solve the problem of comfort in their homes during cold winters, especially in northern provinces such as Britain or Germany? What if I told you that they invented a central heating system that was more efficient than many modern ones? In the next chapter, we will descend into the basements of Roman villas to uncover the secret of breathing floors. Want to know the secret that changed the way of life for an entire empire? Imagine a cold winter in Gaul or Britain. The wind howls outside the villa walls, but you walk barefoot on a pleasantly warm stone floor. This is not magic, but one of the most ingenious and luxurious technologies of ancient Rome, the Hippocaust. This underfloor heating system was so effective that it became the standard for all public baths and villas of wealthy citizens throughout the empire. The principle of the Hippocaust was ingeniously simple and based on the physics of hot air. A special underground space was created under the main living area or bath pool. The floor was supported by hundreds of small brick or stone pillars called pili. The height of this space was usually about half a meter, creating an entire air chamber underfoot. On one side of the building was a furnace, or praefurnium. A fire burned constantly in this furnace, which was stoked by slaves using firewood. The hot air and smoke from the furnace did not go straight up the chimney, but was directed into the underground space of the Hippocaust. This hot air slowly circulated between the pillars, evenly heating the stone floor slabs above it. The floor accumulated this heat and then slowly and evenly released it into the room. This created an incredibly comfortable environment without drafts or smoke. The temperature was constant and the air in the room remained clean. It was a real revolution in comfort, comparable to modern underfloor heating systems, only it worked without electricity. But Roman engineers went even further. They did not limit themselves to heating the floors. In the walls of the rooms, they also created special channels made of hollow ceramic pipes called tubuli. Hot air passed under the floor and rushed up these wall channels before exiting through the chimney on the roof. Thus, not only the floor but also the walls radiated pleasant warmth. This technology was especially important for the functioning of public baths, or thermae. The thermae were the center of social life, and the Hippocaust allowed for the creation of different temperature zones. In the caldarium, hot room, the floor and walls were heated to the limit, creating a sauna effect. The tepidarium, warm room, was kept at a comfortable temperature, and the frigidarium, cold room, was not heated at all. Of course, such a system was incredibly expensive to build and operate. It required a huge amount of firewood, which led to the deforestation of the areas surrounding large cities. In addition, it required the constant labor of slaves who kept the fires burning in the furnaces around the clock. That is why the Hippocaust was a sign of high status and wealth. For villas in the cold northern provinces, the Hippocaust was not a luxury, but a necessity. It allowed Roman officials and landowners to maintain their accustomed Mediterranean lifestyle in a harsh climate. Archaeologists find the remains of these systems throughout Europe, from Scotland to the shores of the Black Sea, which indicates the widespread use of this technology. With the fall of the Roman Empire, this complex technology was completely lost. In the Middle Ages, people returned to primitive open hearths in the center of the room, which provided little heat and filled the room with smoke. It took more than 1,000 years for humanity to reinvent the idea of central heating, which was so well known to Roman engineers. The Hippocaust is a striking example of how the Romans used simple laws of physics to create complex and efficient life support systems. They understood how to control air and heat flows and created a level of comfort that remained unattainable for most Europeans until the 19th century. It was a technology that literally warmed the empire. Like this video if you are also amazed by the engineering minds of the ancients. And subscribe to our channel so you don't miss new videos about the amazing technologies of ancient Rome. What if I told you that roads built 2,000 years ago are not only still in use today, but are also superior in quality to many modern ones? Roman roads, or vie, were not just communication routes, but the backbone of the empire. They allowed legions to quickly move to the borders, officials to deliver decrees, and merchants to transport goods connecting vast territories from Britain to Syria. The secret to the durability of Roman roads lay in their complex and well-thought-out design. These were not simple dirt tracks. Each road was a serious engineering structure, built according to a strict plan. Roman engineers, usually from the military, laid out the routes as straight as possible, regardless of the terrain. The construction process began with the digging of a deep trench called a fossa. It could reach a depth of up to 1.5 meters. This trench was then filled with several layers of different materials, creating a kind of layer cake. This method ensured incredible strength and drainage, preventing the road from being destroyed by rain or frost. The bottom layer, or statumen, consisted of large cobblestones and broken ceramics, which provided a solid foundation and drainage. The next layer, rudis, was a mixture of fine crushed stone and gravel compacted with lime. This layer served as a solid foundation, similar to modern low-quality concrete. The third layer, the nucleus, consisted of fine gravel, sand, and hot lime. It was carefully leveled and rolled to create a smooth and durable surface. Finally, the top layer, or pavimentum, was laid with large stone slabs that were tightly fitted together. These slabs had a characteristic polygonal shape and were so well fitted that a knife could barely pass between them. The surface of the road was always made slightly convex so that rainwater would drain into ditches dug on both sides. This sophisticated drainage system was one of the main factors that ensured their preservation for millennia. Water did not stagnate on the roadbed and did not erode the road base. The Romans created an extensive network that, at its peak, included more than 80,000 kilometers of paved roads. All of them were connected to the golden milestone in the Forum in Rome, from which all distances in the empire were measured. This system was so effective that it gave rise to the famous saying, "All roads lead to Rome." An entire infrastructure was created along the roads. At regular intervals, there were milestones indicating the distance to the nearest city. Inns, mansiones, and horse-changing stations, mutationes, were built for travelers, allowing imperial couriers to move at unprecedented speeds. These roads were of enormous economic and cultural importance. They contributed not only to trade, but also to the spread of Roman laws, the Latin language, and culture throughout the provinces. The empire was held together not only by the strength of its legions, but also by this dense network of high-quality communication routes. After the fall of Rome, the art of building such roads was lost. In the Middle Ages, roads fell into disrepair, and travel became slow and dangerous. It was only many centuries later, during the Napoleonic era, that engineers were able to return to the quality standards set by the ancient Romans. Many modern European highways still follow routes laid out 2,000 years ago. What modern invention do you think has the same unifying significance for society as roads did for Rome? The Romans built not only horizontally but also vertically. But how did they manage to erect multi-story structures, aqueducts, and temples without modern steel cranes? In the next chapter, we will learn how a simple wheel and rope allowed them to lift multi-ton stone blocks. Roman engineers were masters not only of civil engineering, but also of construction engineering. Looking at structures such as the Colosseum or the Pantheon, one cannot help but wonder, how did they lift massive stone blocks and marble columns to such great heights? The answer lies in the inventive use of basic mechanical principles embodied in their cranes. The simplest form was a crane called the trispastos. It consisted of a boom, a winch, and a system of 3 blocks, which gave it its name. This pulley system, consisting of 1 block at the top and 1 at the bottom, provided a mechanical advantage, allowing one person on the winch to lift a load weighing several hundred kilograms. It was ideal for small construction jobs and lifting everyday materials. For more serious tasks, such as building the walls of the Colosseum, greater power was required. This is where the polyspastos came into play. This crane was more complex, using a system of 5 or more blocks. The more blocks in the system, the greater the weight that could be lifted, albeit more slowly. It was the main working crane on most large Roman construction sites. But the real giant was a crane powered not by a winch, but by a huge wheel. This device, described by the architect Vitruvius, was the pinnacle of Roman lifting technology. Instead of turning the winch handle, workers, often slaves, walked inside a large wheel similar to those used for hamsters, only human-sized. This treadmill principle offered a huge advantage. First, the workers used the much more powerful muscles in their legs instead of their arms. Second, the diameter of the wheel was much larger than the diameter of the winch axle, which created enormous leverage. Such a machine, operated by only 2 people, could easily lift loads weighing 3 to 4 tons. Archaeological finds and bas-reliefs, such as those on the Guttarian tomb in Rome, confirm the existence and widespread use of such cranes. The images show all the components: massive wooden frames, block systems, and large wheels with people walking inside them. This was standard equipment for any imperial construction project. Roman engineers knew how to combine these machines to lift particularly heavy loads, such as monolithic granite columns for temples. They could use several cranes working in sync. This required incredible coordination and precise calculation to distribute the load evenly. The materials for these cranes were simple: wood for the frame and wheels, hemp ropes, and metal axles and blocks. Despite the simplicity of the materials, the design was thought out to the smallest detail. Engineers understood the importance of strength, stability, and safety. The availability of such mechanisms completely changed the logistics of construction, allowing monumental structures to be erected in record time. These cranes are a perfect example of how the Romans used scientific knowledge, in this case the principles of levers and pulleys, to solve practical engineering problems. They did not invent these principles, which were already known to the Greeks, but they brought their application to an industrial scale. They created machines that built an empire. With the decline of the empire and the end of monumental construction, these complex machines disappeared. Knowledge of their design was lost. In the Middle Ages, similar principles were used to build cathedrals, but Roman scale and efficiency were only achieved again many centuries later. Roman cranes have gone down in history as a symbol of the fact that great achievements do not always require complex technology. Sometimes the correct application of basic laws of physics is enough. What I am about to show you is banned in 12 countries. Just kidding, but this technology was so revolutionary that it can be compared to the invention of the steam engine. We are used to thinking of Rome as an agrarian and slave-owning civilization. But an archaeological find in the south of France, in a place called Barbegal, completely overturns this idea. There, the Romans built what could be called the first industrial complex in history, powered exclusively by water. What archaeologists discovered were the ruins of a giant watermill, or more precisely, a whole cascade of 16 mills. The complex was built in the 4th century AD and was a marvel of engineering. It used water from an aqueduct that brought it to the top of a steep hill. From there, the water flowed down 2 parallel channels, driving the wheels of each mill. The design was remarkably efficient. The mills were arranged in pairs, 8 levels down the slope. After turning the wheels of the upper pair of mills, the water entered a channel that led it to the next pair, and so on down to the bottom. Each mill used the same water, which performed useful work at each stage. It was a true cascade power unit. All 16 mills were equipped with overshot wheels. This means that the water fell onto the blades of the wheel from above, which is the most efficient way to convert the energy of falling water into rotational motion. This proves once again that Roman engineers had a thorough understanding of the principles of hydraulics and sought maximum efficiency. Inside each mill building, the rotational movement of the wheel was converted into the work of the millstones using a simple but effective system of wooden gears. This allowed the grain grinding process to be automated. According to historians' estimates, the complex in Barbegal could produce up to 4.5 tons of flour per day. This amount of flour was enough to feed the population of the city of Aralat, modern Arles, which numbered about 12,000 people. It was industrial-scale production, surpassing anything known in the ancient world. The complex in Barbegal was not just a mill, but a real bread factory. The existence of such a complex calls into question the widespread theory that the Romans did not develop technology because of the abundance of cheap slave labor. It is clear that in the late empire, at least in some regions, there was a demand for automation and increased labor efficiency. The Barbega mills were the answer to this demand, demonstrating that the Roman economy was more complex than we thought. In addition to grinding grain, the Romans also used water power for other purposes. There is evidence of water-powered sawmills that were used to cut marble and wood. These were complex mechanisms that converted the rotational motion of a wheel into the reciprocating motion of a saw. This is another example of the automation of heavy physical labor. With the fall of the empire, these complex hydraulic systems fell into disrepair. Like aqueducts, they required constant maintenance and centralized authority to sustain them. The knowledge was lost, and it took Europe nearly a millennium to return to the level of water energy use that had been achieved at Barbega. The Barbega complex is a window into the almost unknown world of Roman industry. It shows that the Romans were on the verge of an industrial revolution, using a renewable energy source, water, to power machines. It was a technology that could have changed the course of history if it had been given a chance to develop. Why do you think other regions of the empire did not build such large-scale complexes? The Romans were concerned not only with bread production, but also with what happened to the waste products of life in their giant cities. In the next chapter, we will descend beneath the streets of Rome to explore one of the city's oldest and most important engineering systems. Rome was the first metropolis in history to reach a population of 1 million. Maintaining life in such a huge city required solving a complex problem: waste disposal. The Romans approached this with their characteristic engineering flair, creating one of the world's first comprehensive sewer systems, known as the Cloaca Maxima, or Great Sewer. Initially, back in the 6th century BC, it was just an open canal designed to drain the marshy lowlands between the hills, where the Roman Forum later arose. Over time, as the city grew, the canal was covered with stone arches and turned into a huge underground collector. It became the main artery of the city's sewer system, collecting wastewater and rainwater. The Cloaca Maxima was a true engineering marvel. It was not just a drain, but a whole network of underground tunnels, some of which were so high that a horseman could ride through them. The system was constantly flushed with water from aqueducts, which after being used in fountains and baths was directed into the sewer. This constant flow of water washed away impurities and prevented stagnation. The sewer system was inextricably linked to another key Roman technology: public toilets, or latrines. These were not just individual cubicles, but entire rooms where dozens of people could sit side by side on long marble benches with holes in them. A constant stream of water flowed under the benches, carrying all waste directly into the Great Cloaca. Although from our modern perspective such publicity seems strange, for the Romans it was the norm. Latrines were not only a hygienic facility, but also a place for socializing and conversation. They were further evidence of the high level of urbanization and communal life that was unattainable for other civilizations of the time. Parallel to the development of the sewer system, a culture of cleanliness developed, embodied in the Roman baths, or public baths. These were not just places for washing, but real entertainment and wellness centers. Thanks to the abundance of water from aqueducts and the hypocaust heating system, the Romans could afford the luxury of daily water treatments. Thermae, such as the gigantic complexes of Caracalla or Diocletian, were enormous structures. They included not only pools with hot, warm, and cold water, but also steam rooms, gymnasiums, libraries, and even parks. These were public spaces where citizens of all classes could relax, meet friends, and take care of their bodies. The water for the baths was constantly heated in huge boilers and then piped into the pools. The used water was not wasted. It was often used to flush the latrines and then discharged into the sewers. In this way, the Romans created a closed cycle of water use in the city, from clean spring water to sewage. This comprehensive water supply, sanitation, and sewage system was the foundation of health and prosperity in the Roman metropolis. It prevented the spread of many diseases that plagued other large cities of antiquity. Europe would not see anything like it until the end of the 19th century. The fall of Rome led to the complete collapse of this system. Medieval cities became dirty and foul-smelling places where sewage was poured directly onto the streets. The ruins of the baths and clogged sewers of the Cloaca served as a grim reminder of a lost civilization that knew the value of clean water and hygiene. Roman civilization was built not only on water and stone, but also on bread. Supplying the legions stationed at the borders of the empire with food was a complex logistical task. One of the key elements in this system was the Roman field oven. These were not just bonfires, but standardized, often collapsible structures that allowed bread to be baked on an industrial scale. Legions on the march or in permanent camps, castra, could not rely on local supplies. Therefore, rows of bakeries were built in each camp. Archaeologists find these ovens all over Europe. They were usually dome-shaped and built of clay or brick. Their design was thought out to maximize heat retention and even baking. There were also mobile ovens. These were metal or ceramic structures that could be transported on carts. This allowed legionnaires to have fresh bread even during long military campaigns far from supply bases. Bread was not just food, but an important part of a legionnaire's diet, a symbol of civilization and order. This standardization and mass production were characteristic of many aspects of Roman life, from military equipment to bricks. The ability to organize supply and production on a large scale was one of the strengths of the Roman state. Field ovens are a modest but important example of this technology of organization. But not all Roman technology was made of stone or clay. One of Rome's most important and enduring inventions was related to information. We are talking about the Codex, that is, the book as we know it today. Before this invention, the main medium for information in the Mediterranean was the papyrus scroll. Scrolls were extremely inconvenient to use. To find the right passage, you had to unroll it slowly and carefully, holding it with both hands. It was bulky, fragile, and could only be written on one side. Special cases and shelves were required to store scrolls. Starting around the 1st century AD, the Romans began to use a new format. They took wax-coated wooden tablets, which they used for notes as a basis. Several such tablets, joined together, formed a kind of notebook. Gradually, wax and wood were replaced by parchment or papyrus, and the format of bound sheets became the standard. The Codex had enormous advantages over the scroll. First, it was compact and durable. Second, it allowed writing on both sides of the sheet, which almost halved the consumption of material. Third, and most importantly, it provided random access to information. Readers could instantly open the book to any page, make bookmarks, and compare different fragments of text. This seemingly simple change in format revolutionized the storage and dissemination of knowledge. The Codex became the ideal medium for complex legal texts, collections of laws, and religious writings. It is no coincidence that early Christians were among the first to adopt the new format for their sacred texts on a massive scale. The transition from scroll to codex was as significant a step in the history of information as the later invention of printing or the advent of the internet. It was a technology that changed the very way humans interacted with text, making knowledge more accessible, portable, and convenient to study. Not all of the great technologies of ancient Rome were material. Some were abstract, but their influence on subsequent civilizations was no less profound. One such technology was the Julian calendar. It was an ambitious attempt to bring the chaotic human calendar into line with the precise and unchanging movement of the heavenly bodies. Until the middle of the 1st century BC, the Roman Republican calendar was in complete disarray. It consisted of 355 days and was based on lunar cycles. To synchronize it with the solar year, the pontiffs had to periodically insert an extra month. However, this decision was often made for political rather than astronomical reasons, which led to enormous confusion. By 46 BC, the calendar had fallen so far behind the seasons that Julius Caesar, who had become dictator, decided to carry out a radical reform. He enlisted the help of the Alexandrian astronomer Sosigenes. While in Egypt, Caesar had been impressed by their solar calendar, which was much more accurate than the Roman one. The reform was based on the calculation that the solar year lasts 365.25 days. To compensate for the accumulated lag, the year 46 BC was artificially extended to 445 days. This year went down in history as the year of confusion or the last year of chaos. But it was necessary to bring the calendar back into line with the seasons. On January 1st, 45 BC, a new calendar came into effect, which we know as the Julian calendar. The year was divided into 12 months, familiar to us today, with their usual number of days. It was established that a normal year lasts 365 days. The remaining quarter of a day accumulated. To compensate for this quarter, Celsius and Caesar introduced the concept of a leap year. Every 4th year, one extra day was added to the shortest month, February. This simple and elegant solution allowed the calendar to remain synchronized with the solar cycle over a very long period of time. The introduction of the Julian calendar was not just a technical act, but a deeply political one. It demonstrated Caesar's power over time itself, his ability to bring order not only to the state, but also to the cosmos. The calendar became uniform throughout the growing empire, unifying time from Britain to Egypt. This system proved to be incredibly successful and stable. It was so accurate for its time that the Julian calendar became the standard for the entire Christian world for the next 1,500 years. It survived the fall of the Roman Empire itself and formed the basis of our modern calendar. However, Sausagina's calculation was not entirely accurate. In fact, the solar year is slightly shorter. It is 365, 422 days, not 365, 285. The Julian calendar was about 11 minutes longer than the true solar year. This seemingly insignificant difference accumulated over the centuries. By the 16th century, the calendar had run ahead by 10 days. This became noticeable due to the shift in the date of the spring equinox, which was important for calculating church holidays. That is why, in 1582, Pope Gregory XV carried out a new reform, introducing the Gregorian calendar, which we use today. Nevertheless, the Julian calendar remains one of Rome's greatest intellectual achievements. It was a triumph of science, order, and centralized power over chaos and superstition. It proves that the Romans were not only builders and soldiers, but also people capable of thinking on a planetary and eternal scale. When we think of Roman technology, concrete and aqueducts come to mind, symbols of strength and scale. However, the Romans were also masters at creating incredibly delicate and fragile objects. One of the pinnacles of their craftsmanship was glassmaking. They did not invent glass, which had been known in the Middle East for thousands of years before them, but they transformed it from a luxury item into an affordable everyday material. Early glassmaking methods were slow and labor-intensive. Glass was spun onto a clay mold or cast into expensive molds. Such items were very expensive and available only to the elite. Everything changed in the 1st century BC with the invention of the glass-blowing tube, which probably occurred somewhere on the Syrian coast, which was part of the Roman sphere of influence. This invention was revolutionary. The glass-blowing pipe allowed craftsmen to blow glass like a soap bubble, creating vessels quickly, cheaply, and in large quantities. The Romans instantly recognized the potential of the new technology and spread it throughout the empire. Soon, every major city had its own glass workshops. Roman glass blowers achieved incredible skill. They learned to make not only simple household vessels, jugs, bowls, and bottles, but also complex artistic objects. They mastered the technique of blowing into molds, which allowed them to mass-produce vessels with intricate patterns and even inscriptions. The Romans were also the first to use glass in architecture. They invented window glass. At first, these were thick, opaque cast slabs that let in a little light. But over time, they learned to blow large cylinders, which were then cut and straightened into sheets. This glass was cloudy, but it let in light and, more importantly, retained heat, which was critical for the northern provinces. The pinnacle of Roman glassmaking was luxury items that still amaze the imagination today. Craftsmen mastered the techniques of creating colored and mosaic glass. They learned to melt together rods of different colors, creating intricate patterns known as millefiori, or 1,000 flowers. The most famous example of their art is the so-called Portland vase, kept in the British Museum. It is a masterpiece made using the cameo technique. The master took a dark blue glass vessel and covered it with a layer of white opaque glass. Then, like a stone carver, he carefully removed the white layer, creating an intricate mythological bas-relief. This work required incredible precision and a steady hand, as one wrong move could destroy the entire vase. The Portland vase is proof that Roman craftsmen were every bit as skilled as Renaissance artists. They elevated glassmaking to the level of high art. The Romans also experimented with what we would today call nanotechnology. The famous Lycurgus cup is a vessel made of dichroic glass. In normal light, it appears green, but when illuminated from within, it turns ruby red. Analysis has shown that this effect is achieved by adding microscopic particles of gold and silver to the glass mass. With the fall of the empire, glass production declined. The secrets of creating complex items, such as dichroic glass or cameos, were lost for many centuries. Although glass continued to be produced, especially in Byzantium and the Middle East, The level of Roman craftsmanship was only regained in Renaissance Venice. Roman glass is a reminder that ancient technologies were not only practical, but also incredibly beautiful. They served not only to meet basic needs, but also to create luxury items and artworks that continue to delight us today. We have taken a journey through time, touching on only a small part of the engineering heritage of ancient Rome. We have seen how a civilization that did not know electricity was able to build eternal concrete, raise rivers on aqueduct arches, heat their homes with invisible warmth, and create an information revolution with the help of code. The Romans were not just warriors, they were ingenious engineers whose solutions were thousands of years ahead of their time. Studying these forgotten technologies is not just a history lesson. It is an opportunity to reflect on what is truly important in any invention: durability, efficiency, and the ability to serve people. Which modern technologies do you think will inspire engineers in 2,000 years? What other topics from the history of ancient Rome or other ancient civilizations would you like to see on our channel? Share your ideas in the comments. And of course, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss our next episodes, where we will continue to reveal the most amazing secrets of the past.